detención de un estadounidense en Cuba.
El trabajo de espionaje que realizó en nuestro país el ciudadano norteamericano Alan Gross,
condenado por actividades subversivas.
Back in 2009, Alan Gross was a government contractor on assignment for the United States Agency for International Development, also known as USAID. He had been to Cuba 5 times, but in December 2009, a day before he was scheduled to return home, he was detained by Cuban authorities. He was formally accused on February 4, 2011, and on March 12, Gross was finally sentenced to 15 years in prison. U.S. citizen, New York-born, and Maryland resident Alan Phillip Gross was formally accused of acts against the integrity and independence of the nation of Cuba. He spent 5 years in a Cuban jail, and today, we hear his story.
On December 17, 2014, these images captured the attention of the world precisely on the day that the U.S. government announced a new course in relations with the island of Cuba.
Good afternoon. Today, the United States of America is changing its relationship with the people of Cuba.
Just days before the holiday, looking weak but relieved, Alan Gross, the American prisoner in Cuba, was liberated and on a government plane on his way back home after 5 torturous years in a Cuban prison. U.S. Senator Patrick Leahy, instrumental in the liberation of Gross, remembers the nerve-wracking moment.
I said, Alan, you want to go home? He threw his arms around me and hugged me. I said, Patrick, yes, I do. There was a TV set in the president's office on the plane. We're watching news here in the United States. He said there is a unconfirmed report that Alan Gross has been released from prison. Alan looks at the TV and said, I can confirm it. And I looked at another screen was showing where we were. We're now well over Florida. I said, Alan, you're in the United States. You're home. At that point, we were both very, very emotional. And then the steward came and said, Mr. Gross, the president's on the phone.
The reestablishment of diplomatic relations after more than 5 decades was certainly an unexpected move by the U.S. government. Since then, much has been said and done, and many foreseen and unforeseen things have occurred.
Her name is Karen Caballero. She's the anchorwoman for TV Martí, one of the media platforms of the Office of Cuba Broadcasting, one of the networks of the Broadcasting Board of Governors, the independent federal agency that oversees U.S. international media all over the world. She delivers news to Cubans on the island who would otherwise only receive government-controlled information. Karen Caballero covered the Alan Gross saga.
Que el gobierno de Cuba accedió a que un médico de Estados Unidos visite al contratista Alan Gross.
She is very familiar with Alan's story.
La salud de Gross ha empeorado significativamente.
And the Cuban government is very familiar with Karen's work.
Todo ocurre a solo horas de que el gobierno castrista comienza.
In 2015, at the 7th Summit of the Americas held in Panama, Karen and her TV Martí cameraman were denied access to a press conference given by the Cuban government. The Cuban authorities demanded that Karen be expelled, even though she had all necessary credentials and was a registered journalist at the event.
No permiten prensa que les pueda hacer una pregunta incómoda. Esa es la realidad.
Lamentamos eso, señor.
Yo también.
This summit was the first since the U.S. announced easing relations with Cuba, and the Martís have never been in the liking of the Cuban government.
Cuando se ponga fin al bloqueo económico, comercial y financiero.
As part of the negotiations between the two governments, Raúl Castro repeatedly asked for the dissolution of the Martí network.
Cesen las transmisiones radiales y televisivas y los programas de subversión y desestabilización contra la isla.
As a journalist, Karen has been declined work visas to Cuba more than once, but that has not limited her ability to cover the island and provide Cubans with relevant news that allow them to make sound decisions. Through Facebook and other social media outlets, Cubans praise her work and relentlessness.
Today, Alan and Karen will chat about his arrest and incarceration in Cuba. The taping was scheduled months in advance, and it ended up coinciding with President Obama's visit to the island. Alan Gross was at the Marti Studios to comment on the historical visit of the first sitting U.S. president to Cuba in 88 years, and on the memorable speech President Obama gave to the Cuban nation.
Today, as the President of the United States of America, I offer the Cuban people el saludo de paz.
Cubans will never forget the visit and speech given by the American president, just like American Alan Gross will never forget Cuba. In a week full of mixed emotions, it was Karen's turn to introduce Alan to a different kind of Cuba. Little Havana, a little piece of Cuba in Miami that has charmed tourists and locals for more than 5 decades.
I never had so many wonderful. There we go. So we have to. Maní.
The first stop, Café Versalles. Alan had been at this restaurant once after his liberation. While in Cuba, he made a promise to one of his cellmates that included not only to someday be free, but that they would have Café Cubano together at this iconic place in Miami. And they did.
Entonces decíamos, nosotros nos vamos a ver en el Versalles. Aquello se veía tan remoto, tan difícil de que eso se pudiera lograr, pero era una forma de decir, vamos a hacerlo aquí, nosotros vamos a estar en libertad de nuevo.
Now it was Karen's turn to have coffee with this enigmatic man that always appears to be eager to learn more about Cuba, despite having spent the worst years of his life in this government-controlled island.
Alan Gross, we know you love coffee, and thank you so much for having coffee with me this morning.
Thank you.
Well, Alan, I see an amazing recovery in you. You're a different person from that man that we saw stepping out of the plane on December 17, 2014. How has that recovery been? How is Alan Gross now after that experience, 5 years in jail in Cuba?
What can I say? I'm happier now than I've ever been. My wife and I have a home together. I see my family, my friends. I'm in my community. I walk anywhere I want to walk, anytime I want to walk there. I lost my family for 5 years. I lost my home. I lost my business, my friends. But now I have everything. I have everything I need or want.
The Cuban government in 2010 accused you of being a spy for the U.S. What do you tell to those who say that you were a spy to the United States?
Well, in actuality, I was not charged with espionage. The purpose of my detention was to poke Uncle Sam in the eye. And a lot of newspapers have reported that I was arrested and charged with espionage, and they called me a spy, they called me a CIA agent. That's absolutely ridiculous, it's false. I am not a spy, I never was a spy, I never will be a spy.
So exactly what were you doing in Cuba?
I was setting up broadband on a pilot basis, broadband internet connectivity in 3 different communities. That's it. There was nothing ideological about my trip, although I'm ideological now. It was a technical project that I designed. Unfortunately for me, it was part of a larger project that I was not involved with in any way. It was a Democracy in Cuba program. I just wasn't part of that project at all. And again, the government of Cuba did not separate my project from the larger project, as I did.
What was the exact equipment that you took to Cuba that, according to the Cuban regime, was so dangerous?
Well, I had a lot of networking equipment, some routers and some Wi-Fi boosters, and I had a couple of Mac computers and some BlackBerry cell phones. iPhones weren't popular yet, and I had some iPods for music. Those are really dangerous things, you know. I'm being facetious, of course. But what they really objected to was the BGAN. A BGAN is an acronym for Broadband Global Area Network, and essentially it's a satellite modem. It's about the size of a laptop, and when you open up the lid and adjust it and point it in the right direction, you can connect with a satellite, and then that connects with a teleport in another country that connects you to the internet. That's what they found so dangerous, so deadly, that I was a dangerous man. 3 billion people every day log on to the internet, and if it's dangerous, then we have at least 3 billion dangerous people in the world. I think that it's ludicrous.
Can you describe the day of the arrest?
I finished my work. It was my 5th trip. It was the last trip that I was going to do under that project. I was going to go home the next morning, Friday morning. It was a December 4th. I made arrangements for a taxi to pick me up at the hotel, El Presidente, where I was staying, at 6 o'clock in the morning. I packed all my clothes, I took a shower, and I got into bed. I was going to sleep. And then around 10 o'clock, and bang, 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 open the door. I said, okay, you know, they would have broken the door down. I opened the door, and one of the guys said, get your things, you're coming with us.
Did they have an order or something?
They didn't show me anything. They didn't put handcuffs on me. They didn't do anything. They just said, get your things, you're going. And he said he was a detective.
Okay, dressing?
Clothes, plain clothes. Jeans, everybody was wearing jeans, so including me. And then we go a little bit further out of town to, there was a sign that said immigration. And I figured, okay, they're going to deport me. Great. I won't need the taxi in the morning. We were there for about an hour, and then they took me to Villa Marista. By the time we got to Villa Marista, I knew I was going to miss my plane.
He was due home on a Friday night, and we're Jewish, so we celebrate the Shabbat, the Sabbath. So the table he was supposed to come home around dinner time. So the table was set, and the chicken was in the oven, and I was waiting for him to come home so we'd have a nice dinner together.
They confiscated all of my things, and then they had this young doctor take my blood pressure. And he's shaking his head, no, gosh, oh gosh. He said, you have to take this pill because your pressure is very high. And I've never had high blood pressure in my life. And then when this young guy reaches into his jeans, into his jean pocket, and he pulls out a pill, you know, like I was going to take that pill. He says, take this pill, you have high blood pressure. I said, you take it. So he backs up and he says, okay, wait. So he goes out and he brings in a policeman, and they tell me to take the pill. I said, you take it. And then they went up through the chain of command until finally, I guess it was one of the shift jefes, a man named Herodes, came in and he said, look, Alan, if you take the pill, nothing's going to happen to you. It's not a deadly pill. It's for high blood pressure. Nothing will happen to you. But if you don't take the pill and you have a stroke, then I'm going to be in big trouble. I took the pill, and they took me to, they put me back in the car, took me to Carlos J. Finley Hospital Militar, and that's where I spent the better part of the 5 years. It turned out that pill was a sedative, and I didn't take it again.
Okay, so that's what I want to go.
Yeah, they drugged me.
They drugged you?
Yes.
He never called me. So I thought, okay, that's really strange. So I waited another hour or so, and at that point I started to get nervous.
I think we need to call it what it is. It's abuse of power. Abuse of power. The problem with the government is the power that they have is abused. whether it is institutionally abused or individually abused, doesn't matter because the result is the same. People's human rights are abused as a result of it.
I knew that there was like an emergency number you could call at the State Department. And I went online and I found it and I called and somebody answered. By this time it was late at night. And somebody answered at the State Department and they gave me a phone number to call. Instead of them calling, they gave me a number to call, and it was to the Marine Guards unit at the intersection, the American intersection in Havana. And I called and somebody answered. So now I was talking to Havana, it was the middle of the night. He hung up and said he'd call me back, which he did in probably it was an hour or 2 hours, I don't remember. And he told me that Alan had been arrested. So I was actually the first person to know, the first person here to know that he was actually arrested.
How was your trial?
It was a very long trial by Cuban standards. Mine lasted 2 days and there must have been 10 cameras, video cameras recording it.
The trial came much later in his imprisonment. It took the government of Cuba 14 months to charge him. So he was in prison 14 months without any charges.
They wouldn't let me see my American lawyer, my U.S. lawyer. My U.S. lawyer came down twice. They wouldn't let me see him until after the trial. You know, when it comes to the law, it doesn't exist in Cuba. There's no rule of law in Cuba, period.
14 months later, he had a trial. I was there. We were there for I think it was a 2-day trial. So that was the first time I saw him in 14 months. So when I saw him, you know, I just had such mixed feelings. I didn't want to get too close to him because I didn't know if I'd ever see him again. I mean, just all kinds of emotions were going through my mind. And it was awkward because we knew we were being watched and listened to, so we knew we had no privacy. So that was, you know, not the greatest way to see your husband after over a year.
My incarceration was illegal by international standards, and that's how it is for everyone there.
Do you think you committed a crime?
Morally, no. Actually, yes. I did commit a crime. I did. I distributed product that was funded by the U.S. government. That's against the law in Cuba. Our government foreign assistance program should not be used to violate the laws of other countries, period. There's got to be another way. And if you have 55 years of mutually belligerent policies, you're going to have projects like mine. And so it's an opportune time to change those mutually belligerent policies into one of constructive engagement. And then we won't need these types of projects. We won't need to put people like me at risk. We won't need to put people in Cuba at further risk.
What were the charges or crimes you were accused of?
What I was accused of and convicted of was being a threat to the integrity and or independence of the state, which was impossible because the state had no integrity.
How was a day in the Cuban prison?
First, let me say every day was like Groundhog Day. You know the movie with Bill Murray where he wakes up, he's in the same place, it's the same day, you know, and he goes through the whole day and then he goes to sleep. And the next morning he wakes up and he's in the same place and it's the same day.
La prisión se hace muy chiquita y entonces dije, ¿cómo será esto? Él casi no hablaba español, yo casi no hablo inglés y dije, esto me va a traer problemas. Siempre me vino eso, la primera impresión que me causó fue esa. Error. Todos los días nos equivocamos y cada día me doy cuenta que eso es más así. Fue suave, creo que fue un proceso suave de la prisión se un poco así, mirando quién es, qué hace, y yo decía, pero fue poco a poco surgiendo aquella amistad, fue época que fuimos entendiéndonos, empezamos a usar el diccionario los dos, empezamos a comunicarnos, teníamos necesidad de comunicarnos.
We would be woken early in the morning for breakfast. My two cellmates after breakfast would go back to sleep, and that's when I'd start to exercise. And I'd walk 10,000 steps, which was about 5 miles, because we weren't allowed outside the first year. I didn't have more than 20 minutes of sun the first year. After I'd finished exercising, I'd shower. My cellmates would wake, and then it would be time for lunch.
Entonces pues comenzamos a la historia, ¿no? Porque está acá y la familia, y fuimos creando empatía. Yo considero que, no en primer momento, pero a los finales yo sabía que Alan era mi hermano.
The first year I had no television, no radio, no reading material, no music. I wasn't allowed to have paper or pen. After the first year, we were allowed to go outside for almost an hour a day.
En un lugar tan difícil, con la limitación del idioma, y lograr conocer a una persona tan buena, con tantos valores, creo que fue un regalo.
They didn't want me interacting with the other prisoners. The bottom line is, the government of Cuba has some pathologies that they're going to need to get over. You know, and they try to extend their pathologies to the people of Cuba, and that's part of a major problem on the island. It's not healthy. It's an abuse of power.
There was a point that you even stopped talking to your family members. We'll remember that. You didn't want to see them?
Part of my strategy was to keep as much pressure on both governments. I tried to treat both governments equally because, after all, both governments were responsible for my continued detention. In April of 2014, I went on a fast. Some people called it a hunger strike. I didn't eat anything for 9 days.
It was a strategy?
This part of the strategy was to bring attention to the dearth of leadership on the part of both governments for not resolving this silly issue, this silly problem. I did this 9-day strike, hunger strike, and I ended it because my mother begged me to stop.
I can't tell you how terrible I feel about this whole situation, and I know Alan must be suffering even more than I am, because he's there in a small cell and he should be home.
I knew that she was suffering enough with her cancer, so I ended the hunger strike.
For her to have Alan in jail was devastating. I mean, it's her son, it's her baby. So she was absolutely devastated from that. We got news about the cancer. She was thinking about Alan, not herself. She was always thinking about Alan.
Did you think about suicidal? That word was in the media at some point.
Yeah, media reported a lot of things. The media reported that I was arrested at the airport, not true. They said that I was arrested for smuggling, not true, I didn't smuggle anything. They said I was arrested and charged with espionage, not true, I wasn't a spy.
Tell me about the relationship you made with your cellmates.
There were a number of my cellmates, and we became like brothers. Most of them are still in Cuba. One is in Peru, and one is here in South Florida. And we had lunch a few months ago right over there, here, in this restaurant.
What's his name?
His name is Rolando. Oh my goodness. Hey.
Alan, mi saludo para ti y para tu esposa Judy. Y desde desearte a ti y a tu familia lo mejor. Te mando un abrazo grande y todo lo bueno para ti y para tu familia.
Good. His family is my family. Su familia es mi familia.
Yo estaba desde el año 2001 preso, cumplí una sanción de 25 años por ir a buscar a mi familia.
We had dinner here with his family, and it was wonderful. It was a great reunion. We made an oath to each other when we were in the cell, in prison, that when we were both free, we would come here and break bread together. And that's exactly what we did.
Bueno, me ponen lo que ponen a todos, un delito de tráfico ilegal de personas.
He's the real hero. Some people call me an American hero. I'm not a hero. He's a hero. He is a hero. He bought a boat and he went down to Cuba to get his family. This is typical in Cuba. They took him. They arrested him. A trial. They sentenced him to 25 years for what? Human trafficking. That's not human trafficking, but it was a political crime to the government of Cuba. That was a contra Cuba crime, according to the government, and there were thousands upon thousands of Cubanos in prison for doing the same thing. It's not human trafficking. It's not human trafficking. It's a political crime, and Raul Castro should give the names of all of the people in Cuban prisons today that are charged with human trafficking. Those are political prisoners.
Do you consider yourself a political prisoner when you were in prison in Cuba?
Absolutely.
Did you meet any political prisoners when you were in jail?
Let me put it this way. I met about 20 men. Only 3 of them I consider criminals. They for theft or whatever. The rest of them were political as far as I'm concerned. 17 out of 20. Now, I'm not saying that that's the ratio of political prisoners to criminal prisoners in all of Cuba, but I would venture a guess to say that there are thousands of political prisoners in Cuba right now.
Do you think the Cuban government arrested you thinking that they could at some point use you as a bargaining chip?
I believe that they felt that they could leverage me to do something. And I guess that there was some discussion within the government, because it took about 3 or 4 months before my Cuban lawyer said, "Alan, I think the government wants to trade you for Los Cinco." And I said, duh.
Do you know that already?
I sensed that they wanted to trade me. And so at that point I figured, well, my arbitrary detention was more like a kidnapping, and they were holding me for ransom. And the ransom was Los Cinco. And that's something that I said to my lawyer, forget it. Forget it. Nobody's going to trade me for 5 Cuban spies. I'm not a spy.
In Washington, D.C., Senator Patrick Leahy, who was crucial in the liberation of Alan Gross, remembers those days and all of their challenges.
They didn't consider him a spy. They felt that what he was doing broke the law there, and they could make a strong case to that effect.
Judith Gross will always remember the agony of the first few days and the pain throughout those long 5 years.
That was probably the worst time of my life. I needed to be in New York. I mean, that's where my daughter was, but I couldn't do it. I managed to get there for some of her chemotherapy treatments. She was diagnosed in 2010, and he had been in prison since December of 2009. I needed to be with her, but I needed to be working on Alan's case, and I needed to work. I was working basically 10-hour days at the time, and I needed to do that because I was supporting myself. I didn't have Alan's income.
Having Café Cubano amongst Cubans takes more than just a few minutes. Such a small task normally takes more than one shot and endless hours of conversation.
Alan, would you like to go to Calle Ocho, where all Cubans are?
Absolutamente.
Let's go.
Great, okay.
Coming with me?
Listo.
Let's go.
Okay.
The outing continued on Calle Ocho.
I mean, this is very popular. This is a very popular place in Miami.
And at the legendary Domino Park, Mr. Gross had the opportunity to relive the experiences he once had with Cubans on the streets of Havana.
Although he claimed he had never played dominoes, he ended up winning a few rounds and infuriating some of the Cubans standing by, especially those who criticized that Gross was swapped for Cuban intelligence officers convicted in Miami of conspiracy to commit espionage, conspiracy to commit murder, acting as an agent of a foreign government, and other illegal activities in the United States.
And this just came in.
A quaint coffee bar on Calle Ocho filled with Cuban memorabilia was the next stop. Karen still had many pending questions, especially the sensitive subject of him being swapped for spies.
Alan, here we are, different place, but in Little Havana, in Miami. You were liberated in exchange for 3 Cubans accused of being related to the killing of Cubans and Cuban American citizens when they shot down the Hermanos al Rescate plane.
La tenemos en captura, autorízanos. Es esa. Autorízanos, cojones, que la tenemos. Autorizado a destruir 08. ¡Seguimos, cojones! ¡Seguimos! Tenemos otra avioneta. La otra destruida, la otra destruida.
What would you say to the families of the victims and to those that resent that these 3 were liberated?
I'm not an expert on Los Cinco. Even if there were only 3 left, they were still Los Cinco, which shows you how efficient the Cuban government is with math. I don't mean any disrespect. I feel terrible. I'm very sorry. I sympathize and I empathize with those who have lost loved ones because of the Cuban government. I don't know what to say about Los Cinco other than I believe that the U.S. justice system failed. I think that there were some problems. Whether they were guilty or not, I am not in a position to say. But I think the legal process that they went through was flawed.
Why? I was there.
I mean, no disrespect to the families of Brothers to the Rescue. I think what they did was very brave and very valiant. They were told they were going to be shot down.
But it wasn't
I'm very
Cuban.
sorry.
No,
we don't know
Cuban.
that. I'm sorry. The evidence about where they were shot down has never been revealed. Never been revealed. We can believe whatever we want to. There are those who believe they were shot down in international airspace. There are those who believe they were shot down in Cuban airspace. And I'm not here to argue that. I'm not qualified to argue it, but I do know that the evidence has never been revealed in public. It's academic. At this point, it's academic. Those guys are down there again. They're living in Cuba. Don't let them be an anchor to drag you down. I don't want them to be an anchor to drag me down. I hope that the entire Cuban American community lets go of the anchor. Move forward. Move forward. We can't
but there's
go back.
families that have lost their, the loved ones.
I lost my mother. I lost my mother-in-law. I lost my brother-in-law. I lost my cousin. I almost lost my daughter. I have to move forward. There's nothing I cannot get those years back. I cannot get those family members back. They are gone. I can remember them. They will live in my memory forever. I will not let that drag me down. That's an anchor. It's not healthy. I have to say something about the anger, because the anger that I felt and the anger that I still feel, I'm sure is very similar to the anger that a lot of Cuban Americans feel, that a lot of people in Little Havana feel. And all I have to say about that is that anger is like a weight. It weighs us down, and we can't move forward with an anchor tying us down. We have to let go of some of the anger. We'll never let go of all of the anger, and maybe we shouldn't, but we have to let go of some of the anger so that we can move forward. And that's why I say I'd much rather focus on the next 5 years of my life than the last 5 years of my life. It's more important because I'm free. The U.S. government did not come to a settlement with my wife and me. What was reported in the media is erroneous. I didn't receive one dime in any settlement from the U.S. government, not a dime. And I had some legal fees that I had to pay. I had medical fees to pay, these being part of it.
After the reestablishment of relations, that you were a key point in all that between Cuba and the United States, what do you think is going to change for the Cubans in the island?
The Cuban people are the light on the island, and they need to make the change. The government is part of that process. They have to agree. They have to bend with the times. The times are changing in Cuba. It's time. El tiempo para cambio in Cuba. It doesn't mean there has to be another revolution. It doesn't mean there has to be any violence. It doesn't mean there has to be any ill will. Quite the contrary. Change is growth. It's not easy, but it changes growth.
What do you think there's in Cuba then?
Very corrupt, fascist system. It's not a system at all. Right now it's a decayed system. The system is disintegrating. And if the government wants to save itself, it's going to have to bend and modernize itself. It's living in the dark ages. It has to change. But if you look at the UN Convention on Genocide, there are certain criteria in order to be considered genocide. Mm-hmm. Short of all of those criteria, the UN calls it crimes against humanity. And by retarding the development of a population, as this government in Cuba did, they're guilty of crimes against humanity. They did not give people access to information. They abused their power to the detriment of the Cuban people. That has to change. There's no place in that in the world today. They have to join the world community, otherwise they'll disappear.
Gross insists that someday he will go back to Cuba with his wife Judith. But at this moment, he just wants to enjoy the beautiful things Cuba has to offer. Obviously, their visit will be subject to the Cuban government granting them visas, and that seems like a very remote possibility.
A message to the Cuban people, especially those that are living in Cuba.
To the people of Cuba, believe it or not, I love you. I love you. My blood is in your country now. I have tremendous respect because you have survived. I'm a lucky person because I have a support network and mechanism that helped me out of a terrible situation. And I want you to know that your support mechanism is getting stronger and stronger in this country and elsewhere. And there's no turning back. We will not stop until your lives are better. And TV Marti and Radio Marti helps to set the record straight. And I think that it's something that the people of Cuba can depend on as far as a source for verdad.
Alan's enthusiasm being surrounded by Cubans again was palpable. He does understand why some disagree with the turn of events. He respects their feelings. But regardless of those complaints, Gross has taken his time as a free man to get to know more about Cubans, and more importantly, to defend the rights of the Cuban people by recounting the ongoing violations under the Castro government.
I apologize to my family, first and foremost. I put them through hell. I really did. I know that they suffered immensely because of what happened to me.
But it wasn't your fault.
You know, I have to accept some blame. I have to accept some blame because in my zeal to go to Cuba, not any ideological thing, my ideal. There's a difference between ideals and ideology. And ideals don't get old. People do, but ideals don't. And the ideal for me was to connect people with the rest of the world. What a wonderful thing. What a wonderful gift. Because the technology allows it now, I'm able to give that connectivity between people who are disconnected with the rest of the world. And ironically, I became disconnected from the rest of the world.
Back in Maryland, it seems like Alan and Judy's lives have gone back to normal and the bad memories are fading away.
These negotiations were going back and forth almost to the last second. If any part of it had unraveled, the whole thing unraveled. I mean, it was an all or nothing.
Today, Alan spends his days consulting on economic development and community engagement.
Alan Gross took part in a conference involving internet freedom in Cuba.
And also on speaking to diverse audiences around the world.
I don't think you can download democracy. I think it has to be uploaded.
Senator Leahy credits Alan's good spirits for having been able to put this horrendous experience aside.
He's an amazing person. In prison, he'd lost almost 100 pounds. But every time I'd meet with him, he was so strong in his feelings.
Rolando, Alan's cellmate in La Habana, has won a lifetime friend.
Nos tratamos de hermanos, mi brother para acá y mi brother para allá.
Judith Gross, the wife, the friend, the relentless fighter, treasures more than ever their relationship.
I know, I won't. Hecho en Habana, in La Habana.
And Alan Gross, who had smiled even during the toughest times, proved the old saying, when the going gets tough, the tough get going.
Ay, mamá, ¿qué pasó? Dos, cuatro, tres, cuatro, cuatro, cuatro.
That was your number in jail?
When I was first locked up, yes.
You never forget that.
Oh no,
that number.
Definitely not. Because of poor nutrition, I broke 5 teeth. 3 of the 5 teeth broke off at the gum level. This one,
so
this
you
one,
lost
and
them?
this one. But I ended up saving it in a tube like this.
Oh.
A tube like a cigar tube. And I put it in and I shook it. I thought, oh, that's interesting. Maracas. How do you say roof?
Techo.
Techo.
Azotea.
Quizás hay nieves en el techo, pero todavía hay fuego en el horno. ¿Ah? No?
Yes, you're right. Oh my goodness, I'm learning Cuban here.
That's not good. Gracias. This is a real deal. Oh. Cheers. Cheers. Ah.